I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Vince. I'd like to sort of begin my talk by just mentioning that I guess I can't discuss this novel without injecting myself into it. Vince strongly encouraged me to talk about my own novel because, and I'm always resistant to do that. I always feel kind of strange. I remember a professor of mine when I was in graduate school who came up with a list of books that we had to read according to him when I was getting my MFA, and many of the books on the list were books that he had written. And so I thought that was kind of like not cool. It was kind of gauche. And I told myself, I'm never going to do that. And then Vince and I were talking about this, and Vince said, I think you need to talk about your book too. Because so much of what I wrote, my first book, in a lot of ways, is a response to Bless Me Ultima. Now, it's difficult for me. I'm taking a book that is set in New Mexico, and I'm going to California-size it. And so I think I've done it, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit of my take on this book and why I think it's such an important book, not just for Mexican-American writers like myself, but for the construction of a very unique kind of Catholicism that fuses elements of Mexican curanderismo in a way that I think gave me an opportunity as a writer to feel like my culture and my identity in literature was valid, that there was a place for it. So I'm the youngest of 11. I have to tell you that first and foremost. Don't feel bad for me because I was actually spoiled. But I was raised in a devoutly Catholic household. And I got good at questioning the contradictions of my religion very early on. I noticed, for example, that homosexuality was a sin, but infidelity was fine for many members of my family. Abortion was a sin. Premarital sex was bad. But when a baby arrived, everything was fine, and there was a baby shower, and gifts were given. I remember one day walking home from catechism with my mom. There was a lesson on Noah and the flood, and I remember asking my mom, what about those dinosaurs? I loved reading National Geographic. We had an old friend in our family that we affectionately called Grandma, and Grandma used to give me her old National Geographics. My mother said to me, oh, they were on the boat too. And when I asked her who made dinosaurs, she said God did. And when I asked why they were not mentioned in the Bible, she told me to stop asking so many questions. And she said that it was flat out blasphemous of me to be doing so. What fascinated me most about the Catholicism of my upbringing was the fact that I could commit all of these horrible sins. I could question God, I could lie and cheat and steal, then be miraculously forgiven on Sunday. It was like my own reset button. And it taught me that faith is something that can be rewritten again and again and again. I guess all of this is to say that the revising and re-editing of faith that I was raised in fascinated me. And I saw my faith as an ever-evolving quest where questioning it was a good thing. For my mom, it was static. And maybe this is why I set my first novel in a place like a botanica, where the traces of my Catholicism exist alongside images of other faiths that believe in things like reincarnation, that believe that our sins follow us in our next life, that believe that animals and trees and rocks have souls and energies. Now, again, I'm a little reluctant to talk about my own work, especially in this case, my first novel. But because I wrote my book as a sort of direct response to Anaya's Bless Me Ultima, I feel I must mention it here, if not briefly. My novel takes place in a fictional community in inland Southern California called Agua Mansa. And it focuses specifically on the character by the name of Perla, who runs a botanica a small shop in a strip mall in inland Southern California, a shop that's next to a donut shop and a nail salon. And there she sells charms and herbs and teas and spells. I'll talk a little more about my book as I continue my discussion. My talk is going to be basic. I'm going to give you an introduction to the novel. I'm going to talk about religious syncretism in the novel. I'm going to talk about femininity and spirituality, gender roles, and some of the controversy and banning of the book, particularly here in California. Now, I wish I could say that I read Bless Me Ultima in high school. If I had, perhaps my journey to becoming a novelist might have been a few steps shorter. As it was, I didn't encounter this novel until I was in graduate school, until I myself was working on my first book, Stillwater Saints. And a member of the workshop that I attended at UC Irvine asked me, "Have you ever read the book, Bless Me Ultima?" And I might have lied and said that I had. There were many similarities between my book and Anaya's, this person told me. So I did what every good-hearted graduate student does. I rushed to my library, checked out the book, and read it. And for a brief time, my fictional community was not called Aguamansa, but El Llano, an homage to Anaya. What can I say? I was a novice, I was easily influenced, and I was trying to figure out just how my own writing would fit into the larger canon of Mexican-American literature. And for a while there, I was a bit depressed. Someone else, I thought, had already done it. This book I was working on wasn't an original idea. But I got over that quickly and realized that though it seemed that Anaya had done it already, Bless Me Ultima showed that there was a demand for books like the one I was attempting to write. Books that challenged my idea of faith, books that explore syncretism, that challenge notions of faith building and cultural ideologies. Anaya's novel begins when Ultima comes to live with the Mares family in New Mexico during the 1940s. Ultima serves as the heart of this Mexican-American community. As a healer, prophet, and midwife, Ultima's spirituality blends elements of Catholicism, Mexican curanderismo, and these include the use of herbs, teas, spells, and folk remedies to heal, and Native American lore and beliefs, including animism, which is the belief that non-human entities possess a spiritual essence. Antonio Mares, the youngest of the family, is 7 years old at the start of the book. Antonio, sensitive, observant, and perceptive, serves as a narrator of the book. Antonio is caught between many traditions. For example, his father wishes for him to be a vaquero, or a farmer, on the plains of New Mexico, and his mother hopes he becomes a priest. His mother's a devout Catholic, and his father isn't very religious and respects the land and the earth more, finding spiritual fulfillment in that. Antonio states, "My father was not a strong believer in religion. When he was drunk, he called priests women and made fun of the long skirts they wore." He continues on a little later, "I heard a story told in whispers not meant for my ears that once, long ago, my father's father had taken a priest from the church and beaten him on the street for preaching against something my grandfather Mares had done. So it was not a good feeling my father had for priests." Antonio is caught between these traditional Catholic upbringings and the indigenous practices that Ultima brings with her when she comes to live with the family, bonding specifically with him. Antonio is also caught between the past and the present, between the linguistic tug and pull of Spanish and English, and between the US and Mexico. Throughout the novel, he wrestles with larger notions of sin and death, good and evil, salvation and redemption, and the traditional, often carefully demarcated gender roles present in Mexican-American culture. Ultima helps Antonio grow up, along the way passing on to him her knowledge of folk remedies and traditions that she herself learned. Antonio learns to question Ultima's ideology and that of his Catholic upbringing, never fully embracing either, but coming to understand that multiple interpretations of the world, of faith and spirituality, conflicting as they may be, complicate and enhance our ability to navigate these cultures and straddle multiple borders of faith, gender, and nation. Like Antonio, I grew up in a devoutly Catholic household in Southern California, and we attended Mass regularly, and my mother insisted that we learn the teachings of the church. We attended catechism and were expected to know the traditions of Catholicism inside and out. There was no question. But my mother's spirituality also encompassed other Catholic practices. She prayed to folk saints like Juan Soldado, or saints not recognized by the Catholic Church. And one of the ways this is manifested in the novel is through the presence of the Virgin of Guadalupe, because Our Lady of Guadalupe was a dark-skinned virgin who allegedly appeared at the site where the Aztecs worshipped the goddess Tonantzin, known as Mother Earth, in the years before the arrival of the Spaniards. Symbolically, Anaya is recognizing the influences of pre-Columbian gods and spirits that were syncretized with Catholic saints. Antonio's turning to the Virgen, then, when he feels shunned by God, in a sense represents a symbolic return to the indigenous roots of belief and faith, those qualities of which here are interlaced with Catholicism. The Mother Earth, then, also known as Mother Corn, goddess of sustenance, and snake, as Our Lady of Guadalupe in this novel, embodies a direct link to the traditions of the past, to the blending of ideologies which offer Antonio an opportunity to examine the world differently. Also within the tradition, true faith and spirituality are associated with femininity, but I'll touch on this in a little bit. Anaya is suggesting then that these deities, these spirits of corn and earth, river and stone, are not in competition with more traditional and mainstream Christian faith. Rather, this paganism acts as a counterpoint, which further helps us place Catholicism in the larger context of faith building and narratives of spirituality. This enables Antonio to better understand Ultima's position as a curandera. It helps him to understand how it is that she can embody such radically different notions of belief that recognize superstition and magic as elements just as real as any, where herbs and teas as remedies to ward off evil spirits or to cure fevers and bad dreams have a place alongside science and medicine. Antonio reveals, of all the plants we gathered, none was endowed with so much magic as the hierba del manso. It could cure burns, sores, piles, colic in babies, bleeding dysentery, and even rheumatism. I knew this plant from long ago because my mother, who was surely not a curandera, often used it. Though none of us were healers, we knew that té de manzanilla, for example, could calm cramps, ease troubled nerves, and settle an upset stomach. Like Ultima, my mother subjected us to a host of rather strange home remedies to break a fever, to remove styes, and to ward off evil spirits. And one involved sleeping with stewed tomatoes wrapped in rags and tied to our feet. This supposedly cured inflamed tonsils. I don't know how well it worked. It's interesting to note, though, that along with our willing participation in these traditional remedies, we recognize the importance and presence of westernized medical practices. These folk remedies were never placed in direct opposition to pills and doctor prescriptions. We took our penicillin, and we sipped hot té de canela afterwards. Folkloric and scientific struck an unlikely balance in our household as children, one working to augment the other, forcing us to question, to wonder, to even doubt at times, the same way Antonio does in Bless Me Ultima. The presence of magic and its close connection to female characters is a common motif in Mexican-American literature. Writers like Ana Castillo in So Far From God, and Sandra Cisneros in The House on Mango Street, and Woman Hollering Creek, for example, link femininity to spirituality. The writer Sandra Cisneros refers to herself as a Buddhalupist, someone who combines beliefs in Buddhism and Guadalupism. And scholars like Gloria Ansaldúa also touch on the link between femininity and spirituality. Mexican writer Laura Esquivel explores this as well in her novel Like Water for Chocolate. Through her recipes, Tita, the protagonist of Esquivel's 1989 book, is able to enhance emotions, conjure up love, hate, and loss as she pours much of herself into her creations. In Anaya's work, the presence of femininity acts as a counterpoint to the often harsh and dictatorial role of men. Antonio explains, God was not always forgiving. He made laws to follow, and if you broke them, you were punished. The Virgin always forgave. God had power. He spoke, and the thunder echoed through the skies. The virgin was full of quiet, peaceful love. He further explains, but God was a giant man, and she was a woman. She could go to him and ask him to forgive you. Her voice was sweet and gentle, and with the help of her son, they could persuade the powerful father to change his mind. Antonio associates the male god as strident, unforgiving, and judgmental, whereas the female virgin is loving, forgiving, patient, and kind. And it is this feminine presence, this philosophy that Ultima also embodies, which allows Antonio to gain a greater understanding of the presence of good and evil and right and wrong. As her relationship with Antonio grows and develops, Ultima does not dictate to Antonio. She never forces him to agree with her or to see things her way. Instead, she encourages him to arrive at his own conclusions and decisions. Now, I mentioned Castillo and Cisneros earlier as examples of other Mexican-American writers exploring the link between femininity and spirituality, and I'd like to mention a few more. There's California writer John Reschi, who examines faith, miracles, and prophecy in The Miraculous Day of Amalia Gomez. The writer Luis Alberto Urrea explores this in his books The Hummingbird's Daughter and Queen of the Americas, which are both sweeping historical texts that focus on Teresita Urrea, also known as La Santa de Cabora, a prophet and healer who dispenses cures and helps the sick on both sides of the border. Non-Latino writers also have touched on this. In The Mistress of Spices, for example, Indian writer Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni tells the story of Tilo, the owner of a cramped shop in San Francisco, where she helps her customers attain their wishes and desires with spices and herbs. A younger generation of Latino writers like Salvador Plasencia and Felicia Luna Lemus continue to explore and challenge our understanding of these motifs in their novels, The People of Paper and Trace Elements of Random Tea Parties, respectively. In Plasencia's work, Catholic saints and people constructed of paper come to life. Lemus explores the myth of La Llorona, or the weeping woman, of Mexican folklore as the protagonist of the novel, Leti, fights against the prescribed traditions and gender roles her grandmother attempts to impose on her. I mentioned at the beginning of this talk that my relationship with Bless Me Ultima goes back several years, when I was working on my first novel, which focuses on a woman named Perla, the owner of a botanica in the fictional community of Aguamansa in inland Southern California. When I would workshop sections of my book, people were always quick to compare my character to Ultima, so I decided I needed to read it. And I felt a little defeated because I'd initially thought my idea was original. But then there was Anaya, who years before had written this. Why had I not encountered this book sooner? But then it dawned on me that I could take the concept of the iconic curandera, the concept of magical realism and folklore, and further complicate it too, and give it a distinctly California spin. And it also dawned on me that in my novel, Perla, unlike Ultima, stumbles into her vocation and isn't called or summoned. No spirit animal follows her around. She's just an unassuming woman, riddled with doubts, selling 7-day candles, estampas, Native American dream catchers, and tarot cards out of the Botanica Oshun, which is in a strip mall alongside a donut shop and a 99-cent store. Unlike Anaya's book, which takes place in rural New Mexico, in the wide llanos of the state, mine examines the interplay of faith and belief in a suburban neighborhood that's growing and changing as freeways expand and orange groves are cleared to make way for new housing tracts. And whereas Anaya's novel pays close attention to the link between the indigenous, Catholicism, and Native American belief, I chose to explore the varying and complex interplay among multiple faiths: Hinduism, Taoism, Buddhism, Santeria, Candomblé, Voodoo, Judaism, New Ageism, and Islam that are common in botanicas across the urban and suburban landscapes of California. I'd like to spend a moment or two discussing gender in the novel. The women follow a very rigid and delineated gender roles. Antonio's sisters perform chores around the house and mainly stay out of the way. His mother cooks and cleans and keeps the house tidy for her husband and for her children. The male presence as embodied in the Mares family is depicted as macho and very authoritative. Antonio's father and older brothers are by nature restless and unwilling to be tied down and committed. Once they return from the war, Antonio's brothers decide to take off yet again, ignoring their father's long-held dream that the family up and move to California. Antonio states, "My father increased his pleas that my brothers plan a future with him in California, but they only nodded. They did not hear their father. They were like lost men who went and came and said nothing." And though the Amares family never makes it to California, the novel itself has, by way of controversy, by its incorporation and misunderstanding of issues of witchcraft, sexuality, violence, and profanity. And these are issues that, ironically, the characters in the book wrestle with. It's important for us, then, to understand this text as one that presents a system of convictions that augments and complicates faith, syncretism, and belief. Belief that's always changing, and even at times contradicting itself. The book has been accused of being anti-Catholic, vulgar, sexually explicit, and glorifying witchcraft, as I said earlier. Yet so many of the great texts of American literature deal with issues of faith, spirituality, and formal religion. For example, there's The Scarlet Letter, there's Wise Blood by Flannery O'Connor, Beloved by Toni Morrison, Their Eyes Were Watching God by Nora Zeal Hurston, Ceremony by Leslie Merman Silko, and Behold the Many by Lois Ann Yamanaka. Bless Me Ultima is number 75 on the American Library Association's list of 100 most commonly banned books, joining such others as Brave New World, Catcher in the Rye, and Song of Solomon. In 2009, in rural Stanislaus County, for example, the county school board moved to ban the book because it contains too much, quote, profanity, though parents had complained about its anti-Catholic subject matter. Catherine Quitmeyer, the chair of the English department at one high school that asked to remove the book, told the Los Angeles Times, "Those kids, they came alive when they read that book. It wasn't a book by a dead white male. They understood the words, they understood the culture. They would be the ones we would turn to as experts. They felt so empowered by this book." And really, isn't that the true intention of any work of art? To pose more questions than it attempts to answer, to empower readers and to shatter long-held misconceptions, those things that keep us skeptical and untrusting and always afraid and forever unfaithful. I'll stop there. Thank you.